year ago, America fell in love with a singing janitor from Terre Haute.
Oh, Richard Goodall won, you might remember, America's Got Talent.
Richard Goodall's journey was never supposed to become a Hollywood-style success story. For most of his life, he was the person people walked past without ever realizing the incredible talent hidden behind an ordinary routine. Every morning, he entered the same school building, cleaned the same hallways, wiped down the same tables, and quietly went about his work. To the students and staff around him, he was simply Richard, the friendly custodian who always had a smile and a song ready. But behind that familiar face was a voice that had spent decades waiting for the world to finally listen. Long before millions of people knew his name, Richard Goodall had already experienced the kind of life that teaches patience. He was not someone who grew up surrounded by fame, producers, or opportunities waiting at his doorstep. Instead, he built a simple life in Indiana, focused on his job, his family, and the small moments that brought him happiness. Music was always there, but it was never something he believed would completely change his future. Singing was something personal, something that made difficult days easier and ordinary days more meaningful. For more than 20 years, Richard worked as a school custodian, becoming a familiar and respected figure in his community. Students knew him as the man who greeted them in the morning and sometimes sang classic songs while working around the school. Many people heard his voice in passing, but almost nobody imagined that the man cleaning the cafeteria possessed a talent powerful enough to move an entire country. That was the strange reality of Richard Goodall's life. His greatest gift was hiding in plain sight. Music had always followed him. Before the world discovered him, Richard sang in church groups, performed with friends, and enjoyed sharing his voice whenever he had the chance. He never viewed himself as a future celebrity. He was simply someone who loved music. His performances were not about attention or recognition. They were about connection. But sometimes the biggest changes in life begin during the most unexpected moments. One ordinary day at West Vigo Middle School, Richard started singing while doing his job. The song was Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'," a classic that had inspired generations of listeners. He had no idea that someone nearby was recording him. He had no idea that the video would soon escape the walls of that school and reach people far beyond his hometown. The clip spread quickly. People who had never met Richard suddenly found themselves stopping to watch and listen. They were not just amazed by the quality of his voice. They were fascinated by the contrast between what they expected and what they discovered. The person singing with such power was not a professional performer standing under bright lights. He was a middle school janitor wearing a work uniform. That was the moment America began asking the same question. How had someone with a voice like this remained unknown for so long? The attention was overwhelming, but Richard handled it in the only way he knew how. He stayed humble. He continued showing up for work. He continued being the same person his community had known for years. While the internet celebrated him as a hidden superstar, Richard still saw himself as a regular man who happened to love singing. However, this viral moment was not the beginning of his dream. It was actually another chapter in a much longer story filled with setbacks and unanswered questions. Before America's Got Talent ever came calling, Richard had already tried to break into the music world. Like many aspiring singers, he had faced rejection. He once auditioned for another major singing competition hoping that someone would finally recognize his talent. But the opportunity never arrived. There was no life-changing callback, no instant breakthrough, just another reminder that talent alone does not always guarantee success. For many people, that kind of rejection would have been enough to walk away forever. But Richard continued singing. He returned to the life he knew, finding happiness in small performances and community events. He never stopped loving music, even when music never gave him the recognition he dreamed about. Then everything changed again. After his viral cafeteria performance captured attention online, the producers of America's Got Talent eventually reached out. Suddenly, the man who had spent years cleaning school hallways was preparing to stand on one of the biggest stages in the world. For Richard, the journey itself was unbelievable. He was stepping into a world completely different from anything he had known before. Cameras, judges, bright lights, and a massive audience replaced the quiet environment of a school building. The experience was intimidating, but there was something powerful about the fact that he had nothing left to prove. He was not a young performer chasing fame. He was a man who had spent a lifetime carrying a dream quietly inside him. When Richard finally walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, many people expected a surprising performance. But what happened next was something much bigger. The nervous man standing in front of the judges disappeared the moment he began singing. The confidence, emotion, and strength behind his voice transformed the entire room. The judges were not just hearing a good singer. They were hearing years of struggle, hope, and persistence coming through every note. His performance of Don't Stop Believin' became the kind of television moment people remember for years. The song that first introduced him to the internet now became the song that introduced him to millions more. The reaction was immediate, and Heidi Klum's golden buzzer sent him directly forward in the competition. But the golden buzzer was not just a career milestone. For Richard, it represented something much deeper. It was proof that the dream he had carried quietly for decades had never been foolish. The years of singing in small rooms, the moments of doubt, and every time he wondered if anyone would ever notice had all led him to that stage. As the competition continued, Richard proved that his first audition was not a lucky moment. Every performance showed a different side of his story. His voice carried emotion because his life had been filled with experiences that shaped him. Behind the smiles and applause, however, there was a part of Richard's journey that viewers did not fully understand. The man America was celebrating had already survived moments of deep personal pain. Before the world discovered his talent, Richard had experienced losses that changed him forever. His voice was not powerful only because of natural ability. It carried the weight of someone who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and continued moving forward anyway. His story was never just about winning a competition. It was about a person who spent most of his life believing that maybe his biggest dream would never happen, and then discovering that sometimes life opens a door when you least expect it. Because behind the golden buzzer, behind the viral fame, and behind the standing ovations was a much more personal story waiting to be revealed. A story about heartbreak, family, identity, and the unexpected moments that can completely rewrite a person's future. The biggest moments of Richard Goodall's life were not created by fame. They were created by everything he had survived before fame ever arrived. Long before millions of people celebrated his voice, Richard had already experienced the kind of heartbreak that changes a person forever. Behind the confident performances on America's Got Talent was a man who understood loss, loneliness, and the importance of holding on to hope even when life becomes difficult. One of the hardest chapters of Richard's life came when he lost his first wife, Patricia Sue, after her battle with kidney cancer. For years, she had been one of the people who believed in him the most. She had supported his passion for music even during the times when the world showed no interest in hearing his voice. When she passed away, Richard was left facing a silence that felt impossible to explain. The routines they had built together suddenly changed. The person who had shared so many ordinary moments with him was gone, and he had to learn how to continue moving forward without the person who had been beside him for so long. But Richard did what he had always done. He kept going. He continued working. He continued showing up every morning. He continued being the person his community knew him to be. Even while carrying private pain, he refused to let that pain completely define him. And in many ways, that strength became part of what made his voice so powerful. When Richard sang, people were not just hearing notes. They were hearing the emotions of someone who had experienced both love and loss. Then, when life seemed like it had already taken away so much, it unexpectedly brought something new. Richard met Angie. Unlike the millions of people who discovered him after his viral moment, Angie met Richard before the fame completely changed his life. She saw him as a person, not as an internet sensation or a television performer. She saw the man behind the voice. Her support became one of the most important parts of Richard's transformation. During moments when he questioned whether he truly belonged on such a massive stage, Angie reminded him that his talent was real and that his story deserved to be heard. Their relationship became another unexpected chapter in a life already full of surprises. Just before the America's Got Talent finale, Richard and Angie made a deeply personal decision. They got married in California, choosing to celebrate their love away from the pressure of television cameras and public attention. For Richard, it was not about creating another headline. It was about sharing a meaningful moment with the person who had stood beside him during one of the most unbelievable periods of his life. After his victory on America's Got Talent, many people assumed Richard's entire life would completely change overnight. They imagined him leaving behind his old world and becoming a full-time celebrity. But Richard surprised everyone. Instead of running away from the life he had built, he returned to the place where everything started. He went back to West Vigo Middle School and continued working as a custodian. To some people, that decision seemed unexpected. Why would someone who had just won a major talent competition return to cleaning classrooms and hallways? But for Richard, the answer was simple. That job was never something he was ashamed of. It was a place where he had built relationships, found purpose, and become part of a community that believed in him long before the rest of the world knew his name. The students and staff who had watched his journey unfold treated his return as something special. He was not just a celebrity visiting their school. He was still Richard, the person they had known for years. His hometown celebrated him not because he became famous, but because fame did not change who he was. However, one of the most surprising chapters of Richard's life came after his success, when he decided to uncover a mystery he had carried since childhood. Richard had been adopted as an infant, and for much of his life, questions about his biological family remained unanswered. It was a part of his story that he had learned to accept, but there was still a curiosity about where he came from. With encouragement from Angie, Richard decided to search for answers. Using ancestry services, he eventually discovered information that led him to his biological father, Hubert, a former military veteran and police officer. The discovery was almost unbelievable. Not only did Richard find his biological father, but he also learned about siblings he never knew existed. A family connection that had been missing for decades suddenly became real. Even more surprising was how the reunion happened. According to Richard, his biological father had actually seen him on television during his America's Got Talent journey and wondered if the famous singer might somehow be connected to him. After years of separation without either person knowing the other existed, television accidentally became the bridge that brought them together. For Richard, finding his biological family was not about replacing the family he already had. It was about finally understanding another part of his own story. It was another reminder that his life had taken turns nobody could have predicted. From a school janitor to a national television winner, from losing someone he loved to finding relatives he never knew existed, Richard Goodall's journey continued to surprise people. But perhaps the most important change was not fame itself. It was confidence. For years, Richard had kept his dream quiet. He had never believed he was someone the world would stop and notice. He simply sang because music made him happy. Now, he was finally allowing himself to embrace the possibility that his voice could become something bigger. He began exploring new opportunities in music while staying connected to the community that supported him from the beginning. Instead of chasing fame as quickly as possible, he carefully considered each opportunity and focused on building a future that felt genuine. Eventually, Richard released new music and continued performing, proving that his America's Got Talent appearance was not just a temporary moment. It was the beginning of another chapter. The man who once sang while cleaning a cafeteria was now standing on stages across the country. But the heart of his story remained the same. He was still the same person who believed in hard work, kindness, and staying true to himself. Years after his unforgettable audition, Richard returned to the America's Got Talent stage, creating a full-circle moment by performing songs connected to the beginning of his incredible journey. Watching those early moments again reminded him of just how much had changed. The shy custodian who stepped onto that stage with uncertainty had become an inspiration for millions of people who believed it was too late to chase their dreams. And that may be the real reason Richard Goodall's story connected with so many people. It was never only about a singing competition. It was about timing. It was about resilience. It was about a person who spent decades living an ordinary life while carrying an extraordinary gift. Richard proved that dreams do not always disappear when they are delayed. Sometimes they are simply waiting for the right moment. A man who spent years cleaning floors ended up standing under the brightest lights in the world. A man who once wondered if anyone would ever hear his voice became someone millions of people could never forget. And perhaps the most beautiful part of his story is that after everything changed, Richard never stopped being the person he always was. A man with a big voice, a humble heart, and a reminder that sometimes the most incredible stories belong to the people nobody notices at first.